Hi, Michael. Hi, James, and
Hey,
everyone.
Aaron.
Welcome back to the Library of Congress, the virtual library as such as it is.
Oh well, it's a pleasure to be back. Although I loved having been there in person. That's probably one of my more memorable experiences in my music career. Certainly.
Yeah, well, it was great to have you, and hopefully we'll be able to get you back someday.
Love it.
Great.
So when you were here before, you were here for a number of days
I
and
w- I was
had a number of
I
activities. Can you kind of take us through that whole process?
Well, I mean, I had a chance to look at the first of all the extensive music collection of scores. I mean, anything from, of course, I was interested in some of the manuscripts of well George Gershwin, for example. I saw the original score to Rhapsody in Blue and Concerto in F, but then I also had the opportunity to see like Beethoven's Piano Sonata in E major, Opus 109, and that was really exciting too to see that. And then, of course, James, we had that interview. A lot of people have over the last few years have commented on that interview. Have just in person said that they've seen it and they really enjoyed it. So that was a
Oh,
real
nice.
pleasure doing that with you.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. So this concert I think is one that for me at least I really enjoy seeing it again because it's so interesting. And you have this real interplay between composed music and improvised music. And I'm wondering if that is something that has continued in your own kind of view of where you're going as a musician. I noticed on a recent album, The Vagabond, you have some classical pieces and some original compositions, which isn't quite the same thing.
Well, what I look at is, improvisation is this composition in real time, and I think there is a sort of a stigma that can be surrounded that can surround improvisation, where it's just something that you just come up with, and it's sort of fly by the seat of your pants. But I think the greatest improvisers really have a general game plan and how they're going to tell their story. Um, Even if it is in a moment, you might be a saxophonist or any instrumentalist responding to another instrumentalist, and someone might take you down another path that you didn't expect to go down, but you're still, I think, many times trying to get to the same destination and trying to communicate a story. And just as the great masterpieces, when you have a composer who's spending weeks, months on a great work, um, and really fine tuning it and finessing it to where they want to be. An improviser has to try to do uh, that in real time, which is infinitely more difficult. I mean, you just hear a solo by Louis Armstrong or Charlie Parker, and it's like, how did they come up? How did they come up with that? There's a cellist friend of mine who came over one time, and I was showing her some Charlie Parker, some solos of transcriptions that were online on YouTube. You have a lot of people who are doing that now, like making transcriptions and posting it online. And she was like, "Wow!" She was like, "You really see the logic on paper when it's transcribed. It's kind of amazing."
Yeah.
So when it comes to improvised versus composed, um, I try not to see the differences between the two. I just want to find the same result, and that's very different from expressing oneself in a certain language. The language of Beethoven is different from the language of Bach, which is different from the language of Stravinsky and Duke Ellington, Monk. So I think the challenge really lies is how to take all of these musical influences and languages for anyone to take that and be able to find their own unique voice within all of the music that's been bequeathed to us over the centuries.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And do you practice improvisation? And when you do you try as an exercise to improvise in those different styles? Or how
Uh,
do you approach it in general?
one thing that I do frequently is simply turn on my voice memos on my iPhone and just maybe for an hour or half hour even just start playing and try to have like sort of like a stream of consciousness in my improvisation and just listen back to it and see what comes out and see how logical um, what I'm playing is. Um, I like to, I'm pretty obsessive about it too, is on gigs, recording the gig
Hmm.
and listening to not just the content of what I'm playing, like in terms of the notes, but also I'm very obsessive about the quality of sound and timbre and dynamic that I put into the instrument, which is, what in European classical music, definitely, there's a lot of emphasis placed on that because you're playing a work that's already established. You have the notes, you have the text. So, the responsibility of the performer then is to, find a unique, expressive approach within the language in the performance practices and really focus on your tone and articulation and all of these things. Whereas it's very difficult to do that when you're improvising because you're not only thinking about you got to think about how you're playing your instrument, but you're thinking about the content of what you're playing. So to be able to do both of those things at a very high level is very difficult. I mean, only a few, like I mentioned, Charlie Parker. He's a one prime example of that, who just had such a clarity of tone and expressiveness on his instrument. But then the ideas were endless. Like it's
Hmm.
yeah, it's pretty amazing to hear something like that.
Yeah. As a pianist, do you feel like that's extra challenging because you're often seated in front of a new piece of furniture that you're supposed to play?
No, it's extra challenging, honestly, because you have 88 keys at your disposal. You have an entire orchestra at your disposal.
Yeah.
And I always think about orchestration too, what I'm playing. Like, if this were what I'm playing was it's something that was for big band, how would I play it? Like, can you really hear the trumpets? Can you hear the brass? Can you hear the saxophones? And I played some Jelly Roll Morton at the recital. And, he was so great. I mean, his own pianistic style reflected the New Orleans polyphony that was prevalent at the time. And so when you hear his compositions and you heard his playing, they reflected all of those different instruments and different elements in New Orleans polyphony. You could hear the clarinet, you could hear the trombone, and like on the pearls, you could hear the last string, you could hear the tuba in his left hand, like very, very prevalently. And another person that comes to mind who I love is Errol Garner, who had a very orchestral sense of playing. So really trying to get the orchestral elements on top of the compositional elements, on top of really having a certain kind of precision in what I want to create, the sounds that I want to create on the piano. I mean, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Aaron, you mentioned Errol Garner, one of my favorites, and talk about some of your other influences. I know, obviously Ellington, and maybe just talk about some of the other pianists that you listened to along the way.
Well, Ellington, of course. Art Tatum, I think. Okay,
Oh, yeah.
I mentioned Charlie Parker. Art Tatum that's for the piano, and of course, Charlie Parker was heavily influenced by Tatum. To me, that's like the pinnacle of pianism. I mean, beyond,
Yeah.
even in the great literature repertoire, pianists, in the European tradition. I mean, the fact that this man had such a clarity in his sound. I mean, the virtuosity is impressive, yes, but his harmonic ideas are still, I mean, you listen to that to this day, and it's like, how did this man come up with that? His sense of time. So to
Right.
me, Art Tatum is really at the height of the capabilities of the instrument.
Absolutely.
Duke Ellington, like you mentioned, Errol Hines, and leading up, further to like Ahmad Jamal, the late Chick Corea.
Sure.
So it spans a pretty wide gamut, I'd say. I love this young pianist right now. I mean, the whole program that I did was called, I think, The Blues in the Spanish Tinge. And a young Cuban pianist that I've really taken a liking to, I think he might be my age, David Variles is his name, David Variles. And he's extraordinary pianist. Lots of influences in the tradition, but also very, wide-reaching and wide-thinking. And then also, there's another pianist that I've been listening to that I like a lot is Jacob Sachs. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but
I'm taking notes.
Yeah, Jacob Sachs.
Okay.
So, I really love pianists with a very individual approach, but who sort of, you really know that they have some roots to their playing. The combination of like the folk element and then sort of the cerebral element all put in together. I think that's really what makes great art.
Yeah, I love the range of your music. I mean, it encompasses such a wide range. And I wanted to get this quote in. Speaking of Ellington, his well-known quote to describe you and your artistry: "You are beyond category." He was, and to get back to your first point, being proficient in so many styles, how do you navigate the twists and turns you take along the way in a concert, or sometimes even in the same piece?
He's talking about navigating. Sometimes you get lost. I really like to put programs together where, like, I did a program recently in Newport, which incorporated Bach. I did something from the Wilton Clavier. I played a couple of Joplin rags. I played maybe something by Willie the Lion Smith or something like that, and then something by Debussy from his Suite Bergamasque, Faspier. And what I like to do is create an experience where, these ideas of genre really, are superficial. And really, I like to play music that I feel that I can speak through, that's a part of my own identity musically. And that can be difficult. I mean, certainly playing, putting Bach and Debussy, which are, these are works that everyone knows and everyone has their favorite version or whatever. And that can be really nerve-wracking, but in putting that in between maybe some music that is completely improvised, or it's, part of another tradition. As I've done it more and more, I feel more comfortable with it. It seems overall that the audiences really love it, because then it's you're not thinking, that we're going to hear this today and it's only this, but wow, we have a wide variety of repertoire that we're experiencing. So as I move forward, I realize that I want to do more of that. Despite the challenges of doing it in terms of just keeping the mind in the same, just keeping everything focused, because you do have to shift gears a bit from playing something that really requires your attention, and especially if you have it memorized and internalized, making sure that you can really focus on pre-written music, and then switching gears and going into something where you're actually composing in real time.
It's an adventure for the listener as well as you. Thanks for that.
When you were at Juilliard, you were taking piano lessons from both a classical teacher and a jazz teacher at the same time. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes. So I studied with a few people while I was at Juilliard. Kenny Barron was my first teacher. And in between there, I studied a bit with Ted Rosenthal and then Errol Creed, who are all great teachers, all really fine teachers. But through my entire time at Juilliard, I studied with Oksana Yablonskaya, who's a great teacher, pedagogue, but also a fine performer. And I knew coming into Juilliard that I wasn't going to tackle big repertoire in the European tradition. Neither was I really interested in doing that, but I knew I wanted to still keep my focus on certain attributes of the piano that I wanted to tackle in terms of approaching sound and lyricism on the instrument, and using certain repertoire in order to really pinpoint those objectives that I had. And Oksana was just amazing because she really understood what I wanted to achieve. She understood, the limitations of my time too. She was just so passionate about music. And one of the things that I just always recognized about her is that she, you can feel the sense of the sense of urgency in her playing, and a sense of you've got to really leave yourself vulnerable if you're going to play this music very, very well. And I was very lucky, and the same with my teachers in the jazz program, especially like Eric Reed, who he had an encyclopedic knowledge of jazz, but and knew the things, the areas maybe where I had more holes or gaps, like the last semester of my my last year, he gave me a bunch of assignments for Chick Corea, listening to his electric band, for example, and some of the repertoire from there. And he knew I knew the American Songbook pretty well for the most part, but when it came to some of these other elements in like fusion, and he knew that I wasn't quite as strong, and so he really delved into that. So I was lucky to have great teachers. I think that's essential as the foundation for any musician who's growing and developing.
Mm-hmm. And did you feel like when you were having lessons with with multiple teachers at the same time, did you feel like you had to prepare differently for the different lessons depending on who the teacher was, or was it all just you with a specific goal that they understood?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely gave assignments. Maybe like Miss Yablonskaya would, give me a prelude by Rachmaninoff or something by Bach or whatever. It wouldn't be a ton of stuff, but she would want it to be played well. But it wasn't, it wasn't like she's going to give me, you got to learn the, Chopin Piano Concerto No. 2, and also, Scarlatti and this and that. And it wasn't like I had to prepare full recital.
Yeah.
And with Eric or Kenny Barron was very free with his lessons. I mean, we essentially just played a bunch of duets in his lessons, but
oh wow,
we definitely it was amazing. I think I have some tapes still from that, and some audio tapes of that. And then yeah, so I had my work cut out for me for sure, and that was on top of all the other assignments in school. But my time at Juilliard, I thought, was well spent, and I really cherish those years.
Yeah. I actually have a question from someone in the virtual audience. Nan Lower asks, I love the performance, thank you. With so many styles and genres of jazz today, what type of jazz do you believe will endure in the way that the jazz of Jelly Roll and other early masters has?
I mean, I have no idea, to be honest. I think that's a good question, but
Yeah.
and only time will tell with that. And you think about all the composers, like somebody like Herbie Nichols, right? Who's the late Frank Kimbrough, unfortunately passed away just last year. He's an amazing pianist and composer. He really championed the work of Herbie Nichols. And he had the Herbie Nichols Project. Maybe you all at the Library of Congress knew him because of that. I'm sure maybe there's some something in the library that Frank used. I don't know, but
I know we do have folders full of lead sheets by Herbie Nichols, so it's possible.
okay, there you go. So
Mhm.
sometimes it takes another musician decades later to discover the brilliance of a certain composer. I mean, shoot, it took at least 150 years maybe for Mendelssohn to discover Bach.
Hmm.
And so that happens too. So it's really hard to tell.
Yeah, and with recorded music now, it's a whole different ball game. Discovering music is as easy as a click of a button, and people today, I think, are listening to a wider variety of music than maybe they used to. I mean, at least from when I was a kid, growing up with record stores, you went to a particular section with a particular name on it, like jazz or classical or something, and now it's not there.
Yeah, I mean, it's really an open field now with all of the resources at our disposal. So, and it can be overwhelming even as a musician to keep up with everything that's going on. I can't do it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of music out there. I think the difficulty is to sift through the things that I feel like are that really resonate, and I feel like is at a certain level of artistry. And yeah, that can just take time. It's like a full-time job in itself.
Hmm. I have another question asking, how many hours a day do you practice?
These days, well, during COVID, I had a lot of practice time, which is great. I think, despite having so much time practicing, going back into performing, it's just like a different energy. And you can practice all you want. And then when you get up on stage in front of people, all bets are off. So getting back into the routine of playing in front of people, that is a form of practice in itself.
Hmm.
So part of the practice, I would say, is at the performance on the gig, and then maybe 2 to 4 hours a day. Even now, after I get off this call, I'll practice a few hours and then do something else and then come back. So I personally like practicing. I like the challenge of it. Some people don't, but if there's like a specific goal that I'm working towards, practicing can be very rewarding.
Hmm. And when you're practicing, is there a particular piece of music or a style of playing that you go back to over and over again to kind of get yourself in the right headspace? I know a lot of classical pianists who say that they play something from the Well-Tempered Clavier before they start practicing everything else.
That's actually exactly what I do.
Yeah.
Exactly what I do.
Right.
I don't think Bach. I don't care what, if you play a keyboard instrument, any instrument, to be honest, that Bach wrote for, I just don't think you can go wrong with that.
Yeah. Hmm. So on your on your recent album, The Vagabond, I have a question about one of the pieces on there. I was listening to that, and I've listened to it a few times, and there's a piece that's called Magnanimous Disguise.
Yeah.
That's I mean, it's a great album, but that piece really just struck a chord with me, no pun intended. And the way that it's put together, the beginning of it sounds like that you're quoting a song. It has a very kind of lyrical vocal quality to it. And then there's a freer kind of improvisation, and then it comes back to something. And the songs, the parts at the beginning and end have this tinge to it that remind me of Gershwin maybe, or something that is kind of underneath the surface. And it's just a really fascinating piece to me. And I'm wondering, what is Magnanimous Disguise? What did you mean by that? And how did you?
I can't remember where I got that title from, because I wrote it down almost immediately after. Came up with the title after I wrote the tune. Some of these titles are nonsensical that I write. I mean,
yeah,
I'm not like the most profound when it comes to titles, to be honest. What's interesting about that piece is, there is a melody, but then everything in between, in the middle, is completely freely improvised by the whole band. And one point that I always like to make, especially to younger musicians, and unfortunately, I've had some opportunities over the years to like play several nights in a row, several weeks in a row, like with Cecile McLaurin-Salvant, for example. Playing. I mean, we've done tours for like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or with my band a few weeks in Europe. But that's what we did before we recorded that album. And fortunately, Greg Hutchinson, who was a master drummer, master musician, he was able to make that tour and make the date in New York. And we had night after night. I mean, I think it was about 2 weeks in a row we had performances, with maybe 1 or 2 days off in the middle. And that is something that, unfortunately, is certainly after this pandemic, during the pandemic, but after it, it's going to be more and more rare to have opportunities for, I think, musicians at all levels to have the kind of consistency needed to create a real chemistry in the band and band sound. And it certainly helps. I mean, I feel like that album came out so much better. The fact that we had several weeks to kind of workshop, play through things, get a sense of how the three of us are playing together, and then recorded. As opposed to just showing up at the session date, maybe having a rehearsal the day before and then recording the album. And one of my favorite albums, I used to not really like it, but Live at the Plugged Nickel with Miles Davis, Ron Carter, Tony Williams, Herbie Hancock. And if you listen, I can't remember what year that is. Is that maybe 65, 66?
Mid 60s, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you listen to like Four and More, the concert that they recorded at Lincoln Center in 64, you listen to how they're playing, and it's adventurous, but you can really identify where everyone is, right? The Plug Nickel recordings, they just played for, at that point, at least 3 or 4 years together. And all of a sudden they're going off in these really crazy directions. And the only person that you really can hear the anchor is Ron Carter. He's kind of holding everything in between, because Wayne, Miles, Herbie, Tony, they're just like going like this, and everyone knows where they're at, of course. But it's just so adventurous, and I don't think you can really gain that kind of trust in your bandmates unless you're playing night after night.
Yeah. I have another question here from Nan that says, can you give us an idea of future projects that you have in the pipeline?
I'm trying to I think I'm going to record a solo piano album here in the next couple of months. Just some things that I worked on over the pandemic and just want to get out there. But in addition to that, I'm really advocating for this Zodiac Suite written by Mary Lou Williams that she wrote for Chamber Ensemble. And she premiered it at Town Hall in 1945, and it never saw the light of day after that, partly because of her frustration, I think, around the rehearsals, and ultimately the performance wasn't as strong. There's actually a recording of this that can be found. I think it's called the Town Hall recording. It was released, I think, in the 90s. It's features Ben Webster. He plays on one movement, which is Cancer. But you listen to the concert and you can hear Mary Lou basically covering for the orchestra and the parts that maybe they decided they weren't going to play because there wasn't enough time to get it together, or there are other sections where it's obvious that everyone wasn't on the same page, literally speaking. And so this score was published a few years back by Jazzlines Publications. And so I had the opportunity over the spring, I think in March, to play a few movements, 4 movements of the suite with the New York Philharmonic. And then over just a couple of weeks ago, I played it with the Knights Orchestra at Tanglewood. So those same 4 movements. So the overarching goal is to get all 12 movements performed and ultimately recorded.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, looking forward to that. Yeah.
Do you have something that you want to say, Mike?
Just another question. I don't know how much time we have, but you talking about playing solo versus in a band or accompanying singers? Do you have a preference, or are they sort of equal? How do you approach each one of those?
My outlook or my assessment of playing with singers has really changed a lot with playing with Cecile, because she taught me a lot about the importance of the lyric and how that really serves the song and should be prioritized over anything else. And one of the things that I've now really tried to do better at, with every song that I play, even if there's not a singer playing, I try to know the lyrics, really, really know them and really spend time with them.
Yeah. A lot of horn players have that same, I remember, I think it was Ben Webster that made that same quote that, no matter what instrument you play, you should know the lyrics of the song.
Exactly. And, as an instrumentalist, especially as a improvising musician, I want to play on certain changes. I want, the changes to be interesting and all of that. And, having played with her, you realize, it's sometimes the most simple progressions can be the most profound, especially when you have a lyric that is so rich. Again, when you have a lyric that is incredibly rich, and then you have harmonies or some kind of arrangement that is too rich, it's just like overkill, right? It's like just putting too much seasoning in your food. So I've learned a lot about all of that with her. But I'd say, I don't have a preference. I like playing solo piano. I like playing in a trio format. I think it just all depends on with whom I'm playing. If they're great musicians and everyone's listening and everyone is really committed to performing at their highest level, then it's all fair game.
All right.
Yeah, I think we're coming near the end of our time here, but I wanted to ask you about something, and that is flying. Airplanes. You're a pilot, correct?
That's right.
And I'm wondering if piloting airplanes and that activity has informed your music in any way, or if that has had any kind of bleed over into your playing or into the way that you think about music.
I remember I was flying with this guy, a really experienced pilot, a few years back, and he didn't know me. He asked me, what do you do? I said, I'm a musician. He said, wow. He says, I noticed that musicians really make some of the best pilots. I said, oh, why is that? He says, because they're used to performing right? And they're used to, having to like perform and really make something count. In that instance, he said some of the worst pilots that he's a flight instructor, right? So he says one of the worst pilots I've come across are the ones that are engineers, because they want to know how everything works. When you're flying an airplane, you're not thinking about how everything works. You're thinking about how to operate everything simultaneously.
Mhm.
And I think that is something that is important both in aviation and in music, is especially you're in a live performance setting, you're performing with other people. Sometimes you have to adjust to the situation. Maybe you get lost somewhere, you got to figure out how to get back on. There could be any number of variables that force you to do other things, to make sure the music is still on course, or the airplane is still on course. So I think both are very complementary to each other. I mean, although music is not necessarily life and death, as in being in an airplane, but certainly I'd say that I find a lot of similarities between the two, and how I approach the two disciplines.
Yeah, that's great. I think, Claudia, are we at time here, or do we have time for a little more?
Oh, you're muted.
Good.
We can continue. We can continue.
Oh, good.
There's no
Okay,
reason why we
I
can.
thought 1:30 was the cutoff.
No, we're open to, yeah, we can follow the flow.
Okay, so I was gonna ask you about the recent many months when everything was closed down during this COVID stuff. You said you had a lot of time to practice, and I'm wondering if there were any other projects that you found time for that you hadn't found time for previously.
Well, I did get a commercial pilot's license. I got I got my multi-engine license, which was really fun. I did that over the pandemic. I took a B1 course in German. That was fun. I'd taken German in school, and then I've forgotten a good amount, but I guess retained enough where I could get through a 6 months course with the Goethe Institute. So I did that. That was really fun, and I want to really try to keep up my language skills, I suppose. It's really difficult to I mean, it's same with music. It's like you always have to be doing it constantly to really stay proficient. And so, the only way you can really become fluent in the language is living in that country. That's just the only way. So I don't know if I'm going to be living in Germany anytime soon, but I thought it was just great, the experience, trying to speak another language, and it was an intensive course. So when you did, you were talking to the tutor. I mean, she was just speaking in German, and just really now having even more empathy for people who are coming to like United States of America or any English speaking country, not speaking English very well or at all, and trying to learn. I mean, that's incredibly difficult. What else did it was just a nice time for reading and self-reflection and slowing down. I had such a fast-paced life in certain respects with the traveling and being on a plane and then performing, rehearsing, other playing, this and that, just to slow down and be like, wait, there's more to life than what I was experiencing before. So, how do I really want to get the most out of everything that I'm doing? So I had an opportunity to do that over the pandemic for sure.
Yeah, that's great. A lot of people who see performances of music, they think, wow, that guy is really talented. They see a performer or a musician and they think, wow, they must have been born with some kind of innate ability that allows them to do this thing. And it's amazing, they think it's like magic. and maybe don't appreciate the amount of work that's actually involved. And I'm wondering what you see as the varying importance as you've gone along in your career, the varying importance of talent versus work ethic, and how those work together, and the level of importance of each of those things.
I think I think overall work. You talk to anyone who's at the height of their field, whatever it is, they will always say that work ethic is of primary importance. Of course, there are certain people who are more talented, but without really fueling that talent with hard work, I think it's, usually, that talent isn't utilized to its greatest capabilities, greatest potential. So, I can't even say that I have the greatest work ethic. I think when there's something that I'm really into, piece of music, or if I see like a situation, like an opportunity that I have that I know I could really be good at, that's when I work. And when I'm really not into something, I'm just kind of like, okay, I mean, I'll do what I need to do, but that's sort of the bare minimum sometimes. I hate to admit, but when it's something that I'm really passionate about, it's not even work for me. It's just like, I just want to do this because I just love it.
Yeah.
And that's probably why I'm still in the music. I mean, that's probably one of the only reasons why I'm still in music, because I just love music. Like I'm not that passionate about like the business of music.
Yeah.
Or like, careerism in music, having tons of fans or fame. I mean, I know that stuff is important to a certain degree in order to make a living and all that. But music is still what gets me going. Like hearing a great recording of someone listen to a great recording of Thelonious Monk or Martha Argerich playing Schumann Kindred Singing or something like that, and just like, it's so beautiful. I want to play on that level. Whatever I'm playing, I want to play on that level like that. It's I think that's what fuels it for me. The rest, I'm kind of like, take it or leave it.
Yeah. Is there a piece like a concerto, a classical concerto that you've always wanted to play, but you have not gotten the opportunity to play?
I mean, I don't know if I'll ever be able to play this. It's just so hard. And I've read through it. I've actually read the second piano part, the orchestra part, for a good friend of mine who's like a virtuoso classical pianist. And the Rachmaninoff Concerto Number 3, Piano Concerto Number 3. And there's just so much richness to that concerto. It's beautiful, but it's so hard. And when you listen to someone like Horowitz play it, or Efim Bronfman, or any of these folks from like a Russian school, Rachmaninoff himself has a recording of all his piano concerto. It's like, wow, it's pretty amazing, that someone can record, someone can write and notate that kind of pianism and really be able to play like that. So, I don't have to be able to, I don't think I'll ever play that piece, but I really enjoy when people do play it on a very high level.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a great recording of Martha Argerich playing that just blows me away every time.
Oh, I don't know that recording. I have to check it out.
It's a live recording on, I think it's on Philips, and it's paired with the first Tchaikovsky concerto.
Oh,
They're both
shoot.
on there, and it's a concert recording. It absolutely on fire.
Yeah, she's so good, so good.
Yeah.
Just there's a documentary that her daughter made called Bloody Daughter. I highly recommend. It's very, very good. It's basically documenting this daughter documenting her mother, backstage, and I mean, apparently Martha gets incredibly nervous before performances, even at that level, so yeah, anyhow, yeah, it's this music is wonderful. It's just, I think it's great to be almost 36 and still in love with music,
Yeah.
you know.
So Claudia asks in the chat, what advice would you give to a young pianist?
What advice did I give to a young pianist? Actually, a crazy piece of advice is to do your own orchestral transcriptions and be able to sight read or try to do as much sight reading as you can of orchestral scores. I think it really helps a lot. I wish I'm not so good at it, but I try to occasionally just take a random score that I get on IMSLP or something, and just try to read it down and just try to get all the bits and pieces that I know are there, reading the different clefs and the keys. I think that's really a good skill to have for any musician.
Absolutely. I would add, if there are any young pianists listening, you might want to start with string quartets and then go to orchestral scores.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point.
Yeah.
That is a good point.
Yeah, I took a score reading class not until I was in grad school that I really start to do that, and it's a complete mind-blowing experience. Yeah, that's really good. I'm wondering about the different composers that you've worked on their music. Do you find it, because of something you said about Rachmaninoff, do you find it easier to play music written by a composer who is a pianist? I was thinking about this when you were playing the Gottschalk on the concert today, that there's some sort of ease about knowing the instrument and knowing where the fingers lie on it.
I don't know about that, just because there are just so many pianists, composers who wrote incredibly difficult music. I guess it's nice to know that the fact that the composer was a pianist, and there is some way of playing this.
Yeah, it's not impossible.
But it's not impossible. But there's just so many. I mean, like I talk about Rachmaninoff and just like how crazy that some of that music can be. Bartok, who was also a great pianist, that can, some of those Mikrokosmos pieces. I mean, it can be pretty intense. Yeah, it just depends. I played a suite by William Grant Still recently, who wasn't a pianist. His wife was, Verna Arvey. She was a pianist, and he wrote this suite called Seven Traceries for her, and I just played that somewhere recently. And technically, I mean, everything fit right under the fingers, I think, quite nicely. So I guess it just depends.
Yeah, I wonder how much consultation he had with his wife when he was playing that.
I don't know. I mean, that is
I used to study the music of Roy Harris quite a bit, and his wife was a pianist, and everything he wrote for piano, she would look over and make sure that it was okay. And some people think she actually might have wrote some of the music, but who knows? Her name's not on it, so who knows? It looks like in the chat that we need to wrap up. So I was wondering if you had any final thoughts about your time at the library or this particular program that we've seen today that you'd like to add here.
No, I mean, it's a real pleasure to be a part of this, and I had such a great time at the Library of Congress. You know what? There's something I just got. There's something I would like to share. I don't know if you can see in the background. I'll put my computer up to it, but I actually got an original poster of a minstrel show from 1931.
Oh wow!
And I got this at an antique shop. It's kind of hard to see with the glare. I got it in an antique shop in Easton, Maryland. And I was just sifting through. I was just sifting through, these maps and, these old maps, and all of a sudden this poster comes up. And I know Cecile, I mentioned her before. I think there was some talk of maybe her doing some things, maybe with the library at some point with the history of minstrelsy. She's really into that, like blackface and stuff like that. So I just thought of that because I just got it, maybe like 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
that's really cool.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, that the minstrelsy sort of going into early Broadway by Black composers, it reminded me of a piece, a set of pieces by Will Akui.
Okay.
Who, wrote a lot of songs for musical theater, but he also wrote some sort of more classical-ish kind of piano pieces, and wrote a set of pieces called the Black Patty Waltzes that were dedicated to Sisteretta Jones, the opera singer.
Oh, wow.
And it's interesting how there were so many composers at the turn of the century and early 20th century that were kind of keeping a foot in both worlds, of musical theater and classical composition, just for necessity,
Absolutely. It's such a fascinating history. I mean, I certainly don't know as much as I probably should know about the history of all of that. And, someone like a Burt Williams, and being an entertainer at that time as a black person who was like, a celebrity. He was like kind of like Jay-Z is today, in terms of that kind of stature.
Yeah.
And it's just how thick that history is, from, the 19th century all the way into the 20th century, maybe even before the 19th century. And I think I'm going to start, maybe not collecting, but I maybe want to get a couple more pieces like that, because you just see how prevalent that was and how that really was like an integral part of American culture. And a lot of people, I think, shy away from it. It's like, we shouldn't talk about that, but that's a very much part of our history. And I think it's important that we do that. We talk about and discuss the complexity of it, because it's certainly really complex.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And, even for classical performers who are looking at the works by these composers who had a vast range of styles within their music, and they're saying, oh, well, I can play these pieces, but I can't play these pieces, or, and sort of making those judgment calls about what do you program and what do you not program.
Right.
It's getting, I think, as more music is being discovered from that time, I think the complexities, like you're talking about, are really coming into the foreground and hopefully causing people to have conversations that need to be had.
I mean, this is my own personal opinion, but I think, given the right context and understanding of what it is, I think it's important to maybe perform some of these works and then discuss it and be like, what's the context, and then what is this saying about, the greater dialogue of Americana. I think I think it's important. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. I figured,
yeah, that's really cool.
People at the Library of Congress would be, they would understand, because I've had some guests over to my place and they're just like, what's that? And then I have to explain to them what it is. So
yeah, on our website, we have a little disclaimer that says some of the contents might be offensive to some people, but it's a representation of history. So maybe you can get some of that and put it on your door.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being with us today and sharing your thoughts about music. It's always so much fun to talk to you. It's really
James, I talk to you anytime. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Aaron, and hope to see you back. Hope to have you back at the library soon. Maybe you and Cecile together.
Oh, love it.
Is Claudia listening? Hint, hint. Great.
All right. Thanks
Take
a lot,
care.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.